Welcome back. Did I start at one?
Huh?
Welcome back to the Opposition Podcast, number 11. Welcome back.
Audio is definitely working.
We are testing it out here. We're live from North Korea in Auckland. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Rukshan, you have a couple of things you want to tell the audience because it's been a bit stressful. We want to apologise because Rukshan was late on everything today.
I get the blame, but people in this room right now would know that I've been sitting here calmly and I've done all the setup. Isn't that right, Ezra?
It's right, but I tell you, it's great to be here in New Zealand with a team of New Zealand podcasters and our Australian army. Rukshan, one of the leading independent podcasters in that whole country, and of course, Avi Yamini, who is built.
Is it Australia and Sri Lanka? That's what he means.
You guys
I'll
are
take
freedom
it.
fighters, and you fight from behind enemy lines. I mean, we've just gotten to know how authoritarian New Zealand has become in recent years, and we saw through your work the fight back in Melbourne. So I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks for the warm welcome.
We're excited for you.
Amazing.
Housekeeping from Rukshan.
Yeah, so guys, I'll be monitoring the comments today, even though we are doing this ad hoc setup. I can see your comments. I don't know if I can bring it on the screen because we're trying out this new software, but I will read some of the comments out at a later point. If you do have a question, just put Q first and a question mark, and then write your question. Besides that, if there's any issues with the sound, all this kind of stuff, let us know. Someone's already saying Avi's mic has cut out. There you go. Yeah, he's just gone.
Is it gone? Am I dead? Am I gone? Am I alive?
Is Avi alive?
Have they? This is where I end.
Sound
I knew New Zealand was going to be my downfall. Should I share a mic?
The room's going to be quiet with Avi in it.
Worst case, we'll share the mic.
It'll be a better podcast.
That's right, guys. So, look, this is the first time we're actually doing a traveling podcast setup, so it is a bit difficult to kind of get this all running. But Avi's back. Avi
I'm back.
PM. Yeah, you're back.
I'm back.
But look, guys, welcome. We're coming to you live from New Zealand, Auckland, and we, of course, as we said, we have a special guest here from New Zealand as well. Chantal, welcome to the show.
Kia ora.
North Korea. I had people messaging my Instagram asking where to buy your shirt from.
Rebelstore.com.au. We actually added. Look, do you know what? I was a little bit nervous walking in, thinking, "Who am I going to offend?" And a bit excited because my name's Avi Yamini. And then all the reactions were, "I want one." So we actually added it to our store. Free delivery in New Zealand.
Nice.
Kia ora. North Korea, I like it. I think hopefully it's a thing, and one day we see it in press conferences.
In press conference.
I don't know. With the, we want to see some journalists wearing it as they question the Labor government here.
I'd be excited to see that. I'd be very excited to see that. I know what happened this week that was quite dramatic is Chris Hipkins was kind of chased out of an event by a group of protesters / activists from a party. So who knows? Might see a few people wearing a shirt.
Even you, possibly.
Maybe.
We'll get you there.
I'm not a big t-shirt person though. I'd wear it on top of something, but
We'll make an exception for this one, wouldn't we?
would we? I could do it as a cape. I'll put it back to front. There we go.
She is a hero.
Something will happen. I'm one of the people.
I mean, we're joking around, but the reason you're wearing that shirt and the reason we're launching your book tour here in New Zealand is because when you tried to come here before, the government moved behind the scenes to block you for political reasons. Not everybody knows that story. Why don't you refresh our memory? What happened the last time you tried to come to New Zealand?
Yeah, so it is true. What was it? It was about a year ago now when there was a anti-lockdown protest or anti-mandate protest.
So the big Wellington protest had been and gone, and tensions were running high where people were thinking that another Wellington protest would happen. And so I think that's probably why it was very edgy at that time. And people were going back to Wellington to protest mandates. And also I think it was more of a reminiscing time for people. It'd been a few months had gone since the Wellington protest ended. A lot of brutality happened and people just needed to heal. So they wanted to go back for a day, do a protest. There was some kind of court being held, unofficial court being held by people that wanted to talk about how COVID had been for them. And yeah, you were meant to come over and cover it with Rukshan.
We were all set to go, and then the New Zealand Herald ran a hit piece saying because that's right.
It's all coming back to him now, guys.
Because I reached out to Chantel and said, we've got to catch up and we'd love to interview you. You were a rebel here on the ground throughout COVID and we want to talk to you, have you on camera. And by the way, me and Rukshan are coming next week or whatever it was, a few weeks before. And we've got to catch up. And look, I didn't tell her in her defense. We went through this in the last podcast. I didn't say not to post it. I didn't think there was anything, I didn't even question it. So she, where'd you put it on Telegram?
I think it was on, was it? No, it can't have been Twitter. Maybe it was Telegram.
Where?
I think I just put a post, just a couple of, like a line saying, excited to interview Avi Yemeni when he's here to cover the protest next week or something like that. Something really nothingness because we'd never met before either.
And all hell broke loose. They ran a headline, what was it? The headline was something like, what did they call you?
I mean, I don't want to go into the names they've called me. There's a few.
Maybe conspiracy theorist or activist.
They use influencer a lot.
Yeah,
I don't know. It'll be something like that.
Influencer says conspiracy theorists are coming to New Zealand and they started listing. This is the interesting part. When you read that New Zealand Herald article, it basically says there's a rumor that I'm coming because that's what it was. It was a rumor. She knew it was true. I knew it was true, but it was just a rumor from their perspective. It wasn't confirmed. They didn't ask me if I'm coming. And they wrote and they said that they started listing all the reasons that the government could ban me. They're going into my personal life and going, under the legislation, if you have a conviction. And it was later when we looked at the Freedom of Information, the documents we got and the internal communications from the Freedom of Information request, it turned out, so everybody was basing everything on that article. And the bottom line was the real reason, no matter what they tell you, is in black and white, you can see it. It was my propensity to incite people with opposing views, which I wear as a badge of honor. But my goodness, what happened to a Western democracy that bans whatever they want to call me, an influencer, if they really want to be derogatory, whatever it is, an activist that incites people with opposing views.
Yeah. Of course, at the end of the day, the blame lasts with the authoritarian government that bans you. But as you mentioned, it wouldn't have happened had the New Zealand Herald not decided to become activists. And I think that's one reason that what I call the regime media these days is so despised.
Yeah.
Because that was not reporting. I mean, maybe I don't even know if it was news that there's a rumor Avi Yemeni's coming to town. I love you, but I don't think that's even news.
Look, I do, but...
But this wasn't a news article. This was... and this was pestering the government. I know what calls are from reporters like this. It's like when they would call up Facebook and say, how are you allowing this person to violate your policies? That's not a
framing
question.
of it. It's why haven't you banned it?
And if you don't, I'm going to embarrass you in the story. So that was a weaponized piece of, I'm not going to call it journalism. I put an adjective in front of it. Government journalism, activist journalism. And what's so gross about it is that you would think that if anyone supported the clash of ideas, a range of opinions, it would be a newspaper, the leading newspaper. They were about silencing and censorship. Shame on them. A disgrace for the government to ban you. But for the provocation, for the instigation to be a so-called journalist is so gross. And it makes it so delicious that you're here today.
And it's worse than that, Ezra. Because you're right about all of that. But the funny thing? They've never followed up that story now, the New Zealand Herald.
Even now that you're here?
It was a story that there was a rumour from somebody, by the way, that they call an unreliable source for everything else. Suddenly it was reliable. They ran with it. They had me banned. Now when I got back in, when it was granted again, not another word.
Really?
Not another word. So it was either a story or it wasn't.
Chantel, has there been any mainstream or regime or government media talking about Avi's appearance in his upcoming book event?
I haven't kept a close eye on all of their pages around the book tour. I have not seen anything. As in, they haven't. It's not been a public thing. There might have been one or two, but
not the New Zealand Herald. Not a word from the New Zealand Herald. And what you got to remember is back then, when they wrote that story, it was without a byline. No one even put their name to it.
Who wrote that?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't
God himself.
the fact that it was unsigned showed that
know
they're ashamed of it. They would claim, oh, it's because we're going to be hassled or something. No, they're the hasslers. I think the upside of the regime media not mentioning your arrival is that, they're not mustering street gang enforcers, Antifa style, to come to your events. That said, the events that you've got coming up, they'd be foolish to come and mess around at those ones.
Certainly. Ruxan, how are you finding it here in Kiwiland? You literally came here.
Yeah.
Just why? Why are you following me?
I actually used this tour as an excuse to go on a holiday. So I've been enjoying my time traveling around the beautiful South Island, and it's been pretty amazing.
Is that why we've had a shonky start to this podcast?
No,
We've been holidaying.
I blame Benji for all of this. So Benji, that's the reason if people saw me walking out of here was to go check on the audio. Unfortunately, because it's not my setup, we can blame Benji, and he's getting red there.
All right, lads, come on. You meant to be big men. Take the blame on your own shoulders.
But New Zealand, it's been interesting since last time, obviously, with everything that happened. Of course, I ended up here by myself, and you couldn't come. And this time around, we're all here for your book tour. I mean, it's definitely going to be an interesting book tour, in my opinion, regardless of whatever happens, whether the media covers it, who comes, who doesn't come. It doesn't really matter. It's just great that you can do this and you can come here freely, because whatever happened last time was crazy. It was like, North Korean like.
You saw the protesters that we have here that were against the people that were on the side of freedom. So you had the freedom protesters, you had the anti-freedom protesters. How different are Kiwi protesters to what you've seen in Melbourne?
I think when it comes to Antifa, globally, they're all feral. That's just my opinion. So in terms of those type of people, they act the same all around the world.
Did they get violent when you were here?
I think they're a bit... look, they're probably a bit more sheepish here. Is that the correct terminology to use?
Unless you're like Posey Parker, unless you're about this high and a
I
woman.
think that was really because they felt like they had the numbers, which is what's dangerous when they're in that kind of mob mentality with those overwhelming numbers.
That's what we see in Melbourne.
And supported by the media, almost like, pushed by the media to be this
Well,
mob.
the Chanel Lau wrote the story using the media
Yeah.
to gather the troops.
That's
Yeah.
right. So they weren't afraid in that instance, and that's because they believe they have the power of the media and the state behind them to act in that manner, which is very scary. When
Isn't it fascinating as well? They'll write a hit piece against Avi to try and prevent him from entering the country, but yet a biological man or woman, I'm actually not quite sure, the person Eli that did assault Posey Parker, threw stuff over her, they then run puff pieces on why this person, why we should basically trying to insinuate that we should all feel so sorry for this person and Posey, and they loosely insinuate things and they just dance around it constantly. But I just found that really disgusting. You've got someone that was assaulted, and rather than even giving the person who was assaulted the time of day to say her piece, you run hit piece after hit piece after hit piece. Once she's assaulted, you don't care. You celebrate the fact she's out of the country by getting her attacker, giving them a platform. It was just a gutter journalism.
Was anyone charged with assaulting
Yes.
her?
That person, and that person actually threatened when it was announced that I'm coming. They said they were going to throw matzo ball soup at me.
I don't know what that is.
That's a Jewish soup, but
So they're anti-Semitic
no,
as
no,
well, or is
to
it?
be fair, I think they're Jewish themselves.
Okay.
And
So they have been charged.
they've
They've been
for assault.
charged.
Yeah,
Yeah.
after I think public outrage, because as much as the media tried to cover for that violent mob against that little woman. I think most of the world was looking on in outrage as they chased her out and violently assaulted her.
It's so important that you hold the line on that. A couple of weeks ago in Portland, Oregon, one of the most beautiful cities in North America, an independent citizen journalist named Andy No, he went to court with a civil suit. He was attacked and beaten by a mob of black bloc dressed Antifa. And it was all caught on closed circuit TV. The whole thing, chasing him down the roads, beating him. He staggered into a hotel lobby to save his life. Antifa tried to break in. They filmed themselves. Later, they bragged about it on Twitter. So there was no doubt. It wasn't just his testimony. It was all on tape.
camera.
And then they bragged about it. And yet the media did not condemn. The police did not arrest. The DAs did not prosecute. And so he had to go to court, civil court himself, to sue for damages. And the jurors were terrified. and they actually dismissed the claim. And one of the Antifa lawyers said to the jurors, "I'm going to remember your faces." And the Antifa was. And my point is, the reason I tell you this story, besides the fact that it's a shocking story, very fresh, is that if you allow the political exception to violence on the left, from any of those institutions, the media to apologize for it, the police to decline to arrest, and prosecutors to decline to prosecute, you will have a lawless place. There is no difference between a street gang called Hell's Angels and a street gang called Antifa. There's no difference.
Yeah.
And
I trust Hell's Angels a lot more than I would Antifa.
well,
I know some bikies in it. They live by a set of rules, and they don't actually go around bashing random people. Generally speaking, they whether you condemn the way they live, that's their life. But Antifa go around targeting and excusing violence for people who have the wrong thought.
and there's a cowardice to the Antifa. The Black Bloc, it's a way to dress. It's not to have no identifying marks. And so one of the difficulties Andy No had was, how do you know which thug was whom? When they cover themselves, it's to hide, but it's also they blend in. And when they're anonymous, they get a confidence from being part of the mob. It really is
You see that in Melbourne. They get confident when they're in numbers. You see when we go with Daniel with the security, and when they're outnumbered, they're super polite. Generally, they're not like, they might throw a word here and there, but they're not the feral, violent. What was it? A month and a half ago, where I got smacked with a pole by Antifa in Melbourne, and it's only because they outnumbered us 100 to 1. But that's the thing, and you need to fight that.
But did police in that
Police
case...
back me now, because ever since our lawsuits in Victoria, police are very quick to pull out the red carpet and also to protect us. So yeah, the police have changed that back to before I started before the 3rd of September 2020, when I joined Rebel 2 days later, my first arrest. So since we took on those fights and fought back, like you say, it's completely changed. I used to get assaulted all the time, and they'd arrest me. They'd arrest me after being assaulted back then. So,
well, a question that I'm getting a lot from some of the people watching in is, they're saying, well, we're talking about Antifa, we're talking about these people. How do you actually combat this that's happening in our society with these type of...
Well, what Andy No tried, I thought was brilliant. In the United States, there's something called the RICO statute. It stands for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations. And it was really a law designed to go after the mafia.
Yeah.
Because the mafia is not a corporation that you can sue. And there's so many cutouts. Like, there was always a gap. You couldn't quite prove it. But you could prove that people were associated with it. And that law was created so you could go after people just for being part of a criminal organization, even though you couldn't tie them to a particular murder, for example. Well, that sounds like a perfect fit. The mafia and Antifa operate in similar ways. The mafia is not incorporated, neither is Antifa. The mafia, it seems like they have different replaceable captains. Well, same with Antifa. And Andy No tried to use that RICO statute, and he failed because the judge was a hard left-wing activist judge. But I really like that idea. Now, I don't know if there's a RICO statute or something like that in Australia, New Zealand. In Canada, it's called a criminal organization. Is there a group of people that are identified by some symbol or some organization? Are they committing or planning these crimes together? There's a few tests, and I think you have to do that. And there shouldn't be a double standard. The rule of law means that no one is above the law and no one is beneath the law. And the thing that infuriated me was how the police thought that it was easier to handle you by throwing you in the back of a police vehicle and driving you 30 kilometers away and dropping you off, rather than tackling the actual criminals. And in some ways, I get it. Path of least resistance. You were easier to do that too because you wouldn't stab
Technically,
them.
it's easier in the moment.
But that is wrong.
Ezra, isn't there a danger? Because this RICO laws, that's what they're using in Fulton County against Trump. That's kind of the same type of they're trying to allege that there was some sort of conspiracy. It's kind of very vague. When we start going after protesters, And even if they're left-wing Antifa style protesters, with these type of organized,
Of course, I'm not
isn't there a
talking,
danger?
Of course, I'm not talking about peaceful protests, and of course, I'm not talking about peaceful legal disputing of elections. I'm talking about violence, yeah. I mean, the thing about freedom of speech, and I know you're a free speech, Nick, and I know you are, and I know you are. It's a very strange belief to hold because you've got to give it to your worst opponent if you want it for yourself. That's the strange paradox of freedom of speech. And we have to believe in that. But when Antifa hits you with a pole or whatever, when they mob you or when they smash Andy No on the street, that is no longer a freedom of speech. And it's being abused with the Trumpists, but it is Andy No had it right.
But I guess the question more is, since it's a system that's already there, we use it just like they use it, but the idea of it, do you think it is a concept that's potentially dangerous to be misused against others? Like we're seeing a lot of laws being abused to target
Political people. I mean,
political person.
if they can target the president of the United States of America, former President Trump, and his lawyers using these type of laws, of course they're going to come after ordinary
It's not better
people.
just to go after these people for the crimes that they actually committed. The violence, in Australia, and not that I don't know how successful people are, but you can do private criminal suits against people. You can. Why didn't Andy No do something like that?
You know, I don't know American law as well as I know. I mean, Canadian law and Australian law are are more similar than American law. I think you're right. And the other side seems to have public interest law firms. They seem to have activist NGOs more than our side does.
Yep.
And every once in a while, when you take a move from the leftist playbook, and I'm not talking about violence, but I'm talking about, like you say, a private prosecution, I think it's so rare on our side, and I think we should. Let me give you an anecdote from Canada. Now, you've got a book launch coming up. I had a book a few years ago about Justin Trudeau called The Libranos. No one under 40 will know what that's referring to. There was a TV show called The Sopranos, and it was about Liberal Party corruption. And the book was doing well, and I had a book launch scheduled for Calgary and Edmonton, 2 cities in Alberta, a theater in each city that I had attended at before. Well, there was a Twitter mob that threatened and basically swarmed the owner of those 2 theaters. And I called him up. I said, come on, you know me. It's going to be fine. We'll bring security. He said, in 30 years, I've never canceled an event and I don't intend to. Okay, but he had never suffered the threats that he did before. And then he later told me, he said, Ezra, I can't sleep. I'm that afraid. I said, don't worry, we'll bring security. Well, he worried and he canceled the event. And I literally had my book launch on the street outside the theater. But here's what I did. And I don't know if it could work here, but boy, it worked in those 2 cities. I saw everyone on Twitter who threatened him, because that's where it came from. Now, some people on Twitter are anonymous, but many people feeling bold behind their keyboards, feeling maybe anonymous or untouchable. Like there was a professor at the University of Alberta, a professor who was threatening this guy. And so I took screenshots of anyone who had their identity, who threatened this guy. Now, I sued him for breach of contract, but I sued all of them for inducing breach of contract, which is a tort. He settled with me. He said, all right, here's your money back. And I said, write out the truth of why you canceled. And he said, well, he threatened and he threatened and he threatened. So I had the case for all these other folks who induced the breach. We sued every damn one of them. And, you know, I tell you one thing, when we do events in Calgary and Edmonton anymore, they do not try and cancel it. Do you have the time for that? Do you have the dough for that? Do you have the patience for that? Not everybody does, but I tell you, the left would fight that way. And there was nothing wrong with that. There was no violence, and that's a real law, inducing someone to breach a contract.
A correction, though. You said under 40 wouldn't know The Sopranos. I'm under 40, and I used to love The Sopranos. And the second thing to your point is the left do have all those left-wing...
NGOs and...
what do they call law firms? Like in Victoria, they have one. What did you notice through COVID? They were all silent. They were not standing up. It was us that was standing up. But suddenly now they're all taking on these COVID cases. And I'm looking at it going, you were the same people that mocked us for defending the people there you're pretending to care about.
Yeah. It was the worst civil rights bonfire in a generation, and the so-called civil libertarians, in the main, not all of them, but most of them, just went on a 3-year holiday.
Yeah.
And when our civil liberties burned, I mean, I don't think they honestly believe in civil liberties, except as a temporary tactical weapon to get an advantage.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think COVID proved it.
I think COVID showed me the distinct differences between people that are, I do think you have a lot of people that sit that are centre that really aren't that worried either way. They just want to exist. They just want to live their lives. Then you do have people that are more on the far left, far right, anything like that. But what I do notice is the left are very collectivist. So they will act like a cult together. They will work together. They will try and ruin someone. They'll be very precise and very premeditated with the actions that they do, and they'll do it as a mob. And whether that's there'll be multiple NGOs that will join in, whether it's the people as individuals that just act as a mob, they've got more of a mob mentality. But I also think this is why the left are very successful. I think it's why they've managed to gain so much ground over people in the centre and centre-right over the last 30 years, because they will all work to fund each other. They'll all work to bring each other up. They'll all work for the one common goal, which is working towards Marxist ideology and installing that locally wherever they can, however they can. Whereas what you see on the right, and even for a lot of freedom-based people, they're individualist. They just want to be left alone. They want to do their own thing. That's why when you come to big protests, often there's not one organiser. There could be 30 and they've all got their own ideas for how that's going to go, what that protest means to them. But it's because they are working as individuals wanting to live an individualistic life. They're not trying to be a collectivist group. And I keep thinking more so now that the media is trying to install this cult-like mentality in people. You've got to be part of the cult of Ukraine and wave flags and give your dying last breath to a country you've never been to, and I'm not saying I'm not saying supporting isn't a bad thing. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying you don't need to just align yourself with a group or an identity or an organisation just because the media says so. I feel the same about the trans issues when it came to Posey Parker. The media told people to act like a collectivist cult, so they did. They turned up with their pots and their pans and they screamed at biological women and they assaulted them and they congratulated themselves because they genuinely believe that they're working towards the greater good. And so I don't know how you try and break through that collectivist mentality.
Yeah. And speaking on the media, I think this might kind of lead into how we break through it, which I think is things like this and what independent media is doing, and just getting out, different alternative perspectives out there. But the mainstream media in New Zealand, just recently, there were some revelations, right, around funding and how they're receiving advertising dollars or some type of funding from the government to push certain things.
The government were buying mainstream media stories and airtime.
Not ads.
No, not ads.
Okay.
No, not ads. So they were buying, but they should have been labelled an ad. So they were buying stories. This latest one was about climate change. They were buying mainstream media airtime, so primetime news, primetime articles, but they weren't told. The people were not told that this is actually a paid advertisement by the government. So you're using taxpayer money to fund your own propaganda.
So how does it work? So they said, we pay you to run a story.
Yeah.
And that's the wording on it.
Yeah, that's on climate
and the story
change.
has to be approved or has...
So that it's an ad. It's paid propaganda that is funded by the taxpayer that the taxpayer knows nothing about.
How was this revealed?
And why is the government doing that kind of thing now? Obviously, they haven't done this all the time, but recently they've started doing these types of things.
You wouldn't know, would you? You wouldn't know how long they've been doing that for.
Yeah.
That's the truth. And I think this is the problem, isn't it? Is that we all have a lot of assumptions about how the media works or how the government works, but until you can actually prove something definitively, you actually have nothing. And I think this when I think about the Maui fires, people have all these opinions on what's caused them and what's going on, but unless you have verifiable proof of it, you actually have nothing but your opinion. So it's been great that there's a lot of great writers out there. Thomas Kramer on Twitter is one of them that does some investigative journalism through using government OIAs and pulling that information out of the government and not letting them get away with it. But I did an OIA, so I actually requested communication between me and the mayor of Wairoa, which is a tiny little town that was hit by the floods, because I was texting with him and I got him a whole lot of water for him in his town. He was asking me for it. He knew he had to chopper it in. We had a big conversation. Someone asked for the OIA government documents of our communication and they did not release those messages. And then the mayor said he had never heard of me. but I had all the messages from him. So I go back to his office and I say, actually, here is all our communication. And they say, oh, we didn't know at the time, so therefore our OIA is accurate. So they can just make up whatever they want, and apparently that's absolutely fine. So you would not know how much they're avoiding through the Official Information Act system. You would not know if they're releasing you the real documents or not. And so this is the problem that we come to. It's how much are we actually getting out of them, and how much of that is true? Are we getting the full extent? And I did a Privacy Act request recently to a number of government departments, and we now have it on record, finally, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet under Jacinda Ardern working with NetSafe, which is a third party, to get my content censored on Facebook, which is great because at least we know that she absolutely did have a hand in trying to take me and my content offline, which is what we've been fighting to try and get for a long time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's so much things happening in the space of mainstream media and this challenge that we're seeing fronted by independent media, which is what I believe will actually change the tide. We saw today Tucker Carlson did an interview with Donald Trump before the presidential debate in the US, which had, I think, about 130 million views. And this is Tucker on X, on Twitter. Whereas the Fox News presidential debate, they were literally begging Donald Trump to come on for this reason. But you're seeing this change happening in real time. And Ezra, we have you here from Rebel News, Rebel Media, and you're in this alternative media space and you're challenging mainstream media. What can you kind of, give us some perspective on what's happening here? Is there actually a proper, full challenge happening now to the dominance of mainstream media? And is this why they're freaking out and doing things like, giving governments giving media organizations money to run stories and so on? Like, are they really being challenged in a way that's, making them a bit worried now?
Well, in Canada, 99+% of media companies are on the government take in some way. And that's actually an understatement. We requested the full list. 1,500 Canadian media companies, I didn't know there were 1,500, received special subsidies from the Trudeau government. None of them disclose it. And how would it be reported since they're all in it together? It's a kind of cartel. And so I think in the whole country, there's maybe 5 independents who don't take it, including Rebel News. And although I think a lot of journalists would claim, oh, no, that doesn't stop us from criticizing the government, of course it does. Subconsciously it does. Maybe you don't twist the knife as hard. You don't ask that touchy question with quite as much vigor. Because the government doesn't give the money for nothing. It wants favors. And if you have trouble processing that, swap it in for any bogeyman on the left. What would happen if ExxonMobil gave money to every newspaper and just said, hush, don't say anything. Oh, no, don't worry. They're going to criticize us. And that's the funny thing. In Canada, about 1/3 of the revenue for newspapers now comes from the government. And Justin Trudeau brought forward a bill called C-18 that contemplated extracting money from Facebook and Google and setting up a pot to provide another 1/3 of the money. So big government covers 1/3, big tech covers the other 1/3. Do you think you're ever going to have a critical story again about Mark Zuckerberg or about Google I think one more thing about big tech and big government is that when they collude, bad things happen. For example, let's talk censorship. If Justin Trudeau wanted to censor Rebel News, he could do it straight on, but we would see it coming. We could go to court. If there was a law, we could challenge its constitutionality. We would have some sort of a fair fight. It would be lopsided, but we would know the rules. But what would happen if they would outsource, delegate, contract out the censorship to Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, etc., not through any formal law, not with anything that you could challenge in court, but just a nudge and a wink. Well, now we realize that's exactly what happened. We see the revelations. First, when Elon Musk took over Twitter, revealing what the government had demanded of Twitter. But also now there's a committee in the U.S. Congress called the Weaponization Committee, which shows how the government had weaponized, amongst other things, Facebook. It's not just that the regime media, the legacy media, hates competition from the independents. It's that they're paid to be docile towards the government. And that final layer is they collude in censorship, including through so-called fact checkers, and you broke the big story. You and Avi had a hand in it
Sean,
too.
all
What do you-
Rukshan. I
love
can't
it.
take any credit in this one because there was no way for me to really
Yes.
access. I think it was all Rukshan.
Well, remind the viewers, because I don't know if everyone knows that story.
Yeah.
And it's and this week it's important because
I think
today
it's-
it's blown up this week.
Yeah.
Your work that you got no credit for has blown up this week.
Yeah, I think it's a very important story, and a lot of this centers around it being an important story in Australia right now because we have the Voice to Parliament referendum, which we can talk for hours about. And really, these fact checkers are so involved in, I guess, controlling the debate around it by fact checking just the one side, that a lot of people are up in arms about it, and they actually fact checked one of the major networks, Sky News, and that actually led to them breaking this story, but it's a story that actually comes from what happened with Avi and RMIT University. And in those documents that I observed from the county court, I saw this agreement between Meta and RMIT Fact Lab. And these are commercial agreements that these fact checkers have with with Facebook and Meta, where they're getting paid per fact check. Around $800 up to $40,000
US dollars.
US,
These are US dollars.
up to $40,000 per month, I believe, and that's almost $700,000.
740, I think now.
Yeah, for the year that they can potentially earn. But the problem with all of that is that all of this is done in this beneath the surface with this layer of secrecy, and the fact that we now understand how it's done, how these operations work. I think it really enables people who see these fact checks to be like, hey, hold up. These are paid for fact checks. These are people there's a commercial incentive here. And that changes everything because they're not just doing it from the good of their heart to
find the truth.
Find the truth.
They're not
as
there-
they
they're not
claim.
there looking for truth.
And that
They-
might explain why some of these fact checks lean in one direction, because especially my personal opinion with RMIT Fact Lab, they are activist fact checkers. These are university left-wing leaning professors and students involved in this, and they are just pushing through their agendas and their causes by using these these obscure systems that Meta have set up without any type of. I think they're not even certified.
They love it. They got this thing because you can see they're activists because you go look at their Facebook and Sky, to their
Sky
credit,
did a deep
do
dive.
that, and they dived into these people's own social medias, and you can see they're activists talking about The Voice, attacking the leader of the opposition, calling him they called him something like a racist, like crazy stuff that's clearly coming from an activist. And then these are the people that are then getting paid enormous amounts of money. We're talking about $740,000 US dollars a year is what Sky's saying. It could be up to something around that, based on the agreement that came out in our court case. But you got to remember, they're also taking money from the government. They're also
They're taking donations
on the website
from the public.
These are the same people that call us grifters when we go for grassroots support to do just the work, to tell the truth, the other side of the story, whatever. These guys are taking money from every single side, and they're incentivized not to find the truth, but really to silence the other side.
Yeah. If I can jump in with two quick things. First is, what's a fact checker? Well, we're all fact checkers. You're a fact checker. You're a fact checker. You're a fact checker. And every one of our viewers fact checks us too.
Yes.
In an election debate, you have a clash of competing arguments, competing visions, and frankly, competing facts.
Yes.
And there's no one who has the ultimate final say on what the truth is. And I'm not being subjective here and relativistic. I'm saying, we can say the theory of gravity is a fact, but is a carbon tax the best way to tackle climate change? That's not a matter of fact. That's a matter of opinion.
Just for the fact checkers, 100%. That's a matter of fact.
We got to be careful.
But my point, they're pretending that there is some high priest that is morally, intellectually, in every way superior than our own judgment. And who are they? Well, you said who they are. But here's the thing: even if that's where it ended, fine. So some loser who calls himself a professional fact checker doesn't like your work. So what? Well, it's the so what. And that's why I don't even think calling them fact checkers is sufficient, because they're little judges, little tribunals, without a proper hearing, without any rules of evidence, without any appeal, without any procedure. And when they do a fact check, they don't just publish a letter to the editor or rebuttal. Their deal with Facebook is what's terrifying, because they get and this is why you sued, because it's a strike against you. It's de-boosting you on the algorithm,
Yeah.
and you get too many of those and your page is nuked. So these are not actually fact checkers, which is a lie to begin with. These are mini censors who have the power to silence you. I don't care if some loser at RMIT disagrees with you. What do I care? No one else does. That's why they're a fact checker at RMIT instead of a journalist. No one cares about them. But they have a power you don't to censor you. And that's the outrage, is that we've created this fake industry with fake credentials and fake objectivity and fake deeper knowledge. They have a secret knowledge that we don't have, and they have the ability to shut you down. And it's not just you're a citizen journalist, but even rival big media.
You make me laugh, because one of the things in the case that you have to prove is how many people went to see their fact check on their website, and it was like, direct traffic was none. It's all because where no one's really going to them. No one's going to RMIT to look at their articles. No one cares.
No, I agree with Ezra.
But it is 100%.
It is about censoring. It is about
Because
controlling.
100% they have the power to do it on Facebook. That's the only place people are seeing these fact checks, because they have the power to demonetize and put the big warning on it, and then people click through. And the thing is, it's for them, it's the best life. They get paid to look for what they perceive as their political enemy. They get paid for each one they get. Imagine we had that on our side. Imagine we had that. I don't think it's right, no matter which side, but imagine we had that. There was an incentive for us to track down each troll or each person that had an opinion on the other side, and we got paid for each one we silenced. Because if you look at RMIT's Fact Lab, their website, the fact checks are so ridiculous, some of them. They're over either stuff that is, okay, that's clearly...
you wouldn't believe that.
It's almost a meme. They're fact checking memes.
They do.
Or they're targeting articles and stuff that is no one's even really seen. So who cares? You're the one that's giving it more thing. And thirdly, they're fact checking just blatantly wrong.
Yes.
And I think that's where they got a bit
But it's not what's happening right now, even with the fact checks. It's what they're doing next. And I mean, in New Zealand, they're bringing in the safer online platforms and communities, whatever that stupid bill is.
We have
you
that,
guys are doing the misinformation and disinformation bill. Canada had C11, and then also you've got Brazil's doing Bill 2630, and they all follow similar paths.
I wonder where they get the idea.
I wonder.
But it's all that place in Davos that has nice weather.
Well, they do say the WEF and the UN have put forward petitions saying that they want there to be government censorship, and it's all about helping people feel safer online. But the problem is that it follows the same pattern. It's all massive fines if you don't comply. The government has got control. The government is going to be exempt. And I mean, Australia, the Liberal MP spoke out and he said this is outrageous because the Albanese government would be exempt, but anyone who's an Australian that speaks out against the government wouldn't be exempt. The academics would be exempt, but anyone speaking against, but anyone and any platform that they choose to exempt. So say you had the disinformation project that wasn't government funded, even though they all seemed to be government funded at one point, they could just deem them as exempt. So they could produce disinformation against citizens and get away with it and be exempt from the bills. You can't fight back. So Tucker Carlson having the most watched video with Donald Trump wouldn't matter anymore on Twitter, because Twitter wouldn't even be allowed to host that conversation. Yes. And this is the real problem that they're bringing in. They're not like, we are still street fighting and they're about to drop Oppenheimer's bomb on us.
Well,
they don't care. We're not even in the same playground together. So how do you even go about? Where do you even begin with this?
Well, that's that battle that I'm talking about. So even with X right now. So for instance, when I'm creating content, I don't put it on Facebook because I know that, not because it's wrong or anything like this, but because I know I can't talk about it on Facebook. And it's crazy that we've become this kind of self-censoring when
New
we shouldn't
Zealand's
be.
taking it to the point that if you've got an email list,
Yeah.
so if you had an email list and it reached people and they could deem that to be a platform.
The email list itself
Email list
is a platform.
Yep,
Yeah.
they could decide it's a platform. It's a
So
completely
they're
open
really
area.
ramping up in terms of how they want to
They
control
don't want
information.
you to be able to communicate with people
Yeah.
in a free and open way, an opinion that they disagree with. That's all it comes down to. But the problem is, so many revolutions around the world that were needed, that protected fundamental human rights, there was a number of them that were pushed forward by social media because it gave people a voice. And so you take that away from people, and it might be one topic that you don't think people should have had freedom of speech on, like COVID, but then there's so many others that we need freedom of speech on. And so you'll never come to, there will never be a solution if it isn't absolute free speech for all.
You know, I just checked on my phone. I thought I remembered something, and I did. In the early 1600s, and there was a man named Matthew Hopkins who assumed the title of Witchfinder General, and he would maraud around the UK. And he had this special way of finding out if someone was a witch. He had different tests. And I don't know if you've ever seen Monty Python.
Oh, so
and,
good.
And what floats on a water? A duck. And they had the test of the woman. If she drowns, she's not a witch. If she doesn't drown, she's a witch. I mean, it's sort of a catch-22. But that was based on a real person, Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General. He did not have a special knowledge. In fact, his only special knowledge was he managed to extract money from towns that had witch problems. And surprise, when he was paid to do so, he found
Doesn't
the
that
witch.
sound really familiar?
Yeah.
And it was a
I'm
real
getting paid.
it was a real thing. And he did not have any special skill other than he had the authority and he presented himself that way and he got handsomely paid.
And he was a little murdery.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, literally hundreds of women mainly were executed for that. And the reason I think that's an analogy, and it's certainly not a perfect one, is who the hell are these fact checkers? I'm a fact checker general. No, you're not. We're all fact checkers general. And it's not the fact, it wasn't the witch finder. He was the witch killer. And they weren't really witches to begin with. And all these people who call themselves fact checkers, they're not even that, but that's not actually the central purpose of what they do. And I think you're right. And the one thing, and I think it's a shame for New Zealand, is New Zealand, a small place, a beautiful place, but it does have a reputation around the world as being a little censory. And your past prime minister is now deposited in the United States, and her mission is to bring that New Zealand style of censorship to the whole world. And I regret that my own Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is just so eager to get on with it. And I would hate it if New Zealand's big export to the world was censorship, but that is one of the things that Jacinda Ardern is working on now.
Well, I mean, at the rate she's killing off our farming industry, it might be our only export. Honestly, I don't know what we're going to have left. I really don't. And I so struggle when you go and you see people that are just in pain and they're hurting and you don't even know where to begin to help them. Like, we're in media, we can try and help tell their stories, but you'll never be able to tell enough. You'll never be able to reach enough people. And there is so much pain in this country and in so many other countries. And I found that song that's gone viral in the States recently so beautiful, and I'm going to butcher it. The singer's Oliver Anthony, and it's the rich men of
North of Richmond.
North of Richmond. Yeah,
Richmond,
it's something like
yeah.
that, but it's just
Someone will
so
tell us in the
beautiful.
comments, yeah.
And it just is the true pain of everyday people, how expensive life is, how you never feel like you're succeeding, you never feel like you're getting ahead, you don't feel like you're going to accomplish anything, and you feel overwhelmed by the world at the moment. And I really think that that's what they're pushing for. The media wants people to be crushed. They don't want the right people held accountable, and it's all based around ideology. And meanwhile, you've got people that are suffering, living everyday lives that just need help, and the politicians can't seem to just get off their asses enough to actually see the true need of the people. And I was reading an article recently, and they said that they miss the camaraderie that there used to be in politics. And I think it's that there used to be human decency. We used to have a standard, no matter how much we disagreed with someone, 30, 40 years ago, no matter how much you disagreed, you'd have a conversation and there was a standard that people were held to. We don't have standards anymore. I mean, our Justice Minister drunk drove, crashed a car, ran away from the police, got chased down by police dogs, and everyone on Twitter is like, oh, that's so sad, I hope she's okay. I hope we have standards for our Justice Minister.
I didn't know
What
this.
are you talking about? Like,
It was amazing. She was super woke.
Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, yes, she's probably got mental health problems. Don't be the Justice Minister. Have standards for yourself, and then the party should have had standards for the party and saying this is unacceptable. And I'm getting tired of people having a lack of standards of how they even treat people with human decency. Like, I don't like that freedom protesters went and screamed at the PM and nearly assaulted him to a point that he was driven out, because I think we need a level of decency. I don't like that people did that to Posey Parker. There's a level of decency that we've lost and a level of communication that we need to rebuild. And it's how do we build that communication back with people when you disagree with them, because this is a lost form and people don't want to sit down together because they feel like they're being attacked rather than having a conversation.
But they're gaslighting everyone now.
Yeah.
Just decent people, they're gaslighting all the time. Hardworking people, they're gaslighting all the time.
Bullying.
Bullying.
It's this bullying culture of
You know,
even if someone was to sit down, I have this beautiful, one of my gay friends is just gorgeous, and he wants to come and talk openly about what it's like being in the gay community and not feeling a part of it because of some of what the gay community is trying to install in people, some of what they're being forced to accept. But he's terrified because of how his friends will turn against him. And fair enough. But how sad is that? And it's this culture of bullying and fear and oppression, and it feels like people are just living in such fear that how do we break through that and make people feel empowered enough again that they can even have an opinion?
Yeah, no.
Sorry.
We love
A
it.
bit worked up by it.
That's why we love each other.
It's quite passionate about things that I can't
much,
solve.
There's not much we can add to that.
We can go home. Mind you, for those viewers that are watching this was advertised for 7 p.m. our regular time of 7 p.m. Australian
Eastern
Standard
time.
Time.
Yeah.
I don't think they realise that it's 10:04. You guys are keeping us up.
That's right.
10:04 New Zealand time, yeah.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
Another question that I had was for Ezra. You recently in Maui, and there's been a lot of coverage of that. And obviously, you know, in Australia and New Zealand, we're reaching our bushfire seasons as well. So there's a lot of alarmism in our media as well. What can you tell us about what you saw in Maui and what rebel media saw? And you know, there's a lot of stories going around about it. Some of it goes into the area of conspiracy, but there is a truth on the ground, isn't there?
Right. I mean, we set up a website with that name, thetruthaboutmaui.com. I was there for a few days, and two of my teammates were there for a few extra. And let me tell you what facts are. And this, I mean, these started as rumors, but you chase them down, and there's facts behind them. Number one, the police blocked one of the roads out of the town, blocked it. And so people did die by fire in their cars. That's a fact, not just a rumor.
Why did they block the road?
We don't know.
What's their reasoning?
Well, here's another fact. I don't know if you've ever been to Maui, but there's these warning sirens on tall poles around, and they're for many things. They're to warn about tsunamis, they're to warn about wildfires and other catastrophes. Those were never sounded.
Wow.
And when the emergency officer in charge was asked about it, he said, well, we were worried that people would run towards the fire. Really?
Isn't that what the first thing you do when you see a fire?
That's what he said. He literally
Oh,
said
marshmallows.
Wow, that's
There was the water officer who withheld water for 5 hours from fighting the fire. And there's this huge water culvert right there near Lahaina. And he has this theory about water being equitable and the source of life, and we can't just water things. There were so many infuriating things like that. And those are real. And yes, there are other rumors. For example, media are being kept out of many areas. Why is that? For censorship? There was some censorship. I saw them when I was there. They were putting up black fabric along fences, blocking views into things on purpose. And that is censorship. But in other cases, it's simply because there are so many unclaimed dead bodies, and they don't want people mucking around. In that way, it's a little bit like the ground zero after 9/11. They didn't let just anyone traipse around. There are dead bodies there. I saw so many search and rescue police from the United States Continental with dogs trying to find people. Last point, I'll just answer quick. And we've got a lot of great videos there. I think the government failed. I think the fires were generally natural, and it was just a confluence of the fire and the wind, and there were a lot of, it was a perfect and terrible storm. There may have been some vegetation management issues, but in every case where government was applied to the situation, it made it worse. And when
Is it incompetence, or are these things incompetent?
System.
well, I mean, for example, why didn't they use the Amber Alerts? If I don't know if you have that in Australia and New Zealand, where they send a message to your phone no matter you want it or not. They used that in Hawaii before. They had a false alarm about a missile attack, but they didn't use that for the fires. Why? But
Are there any answers on any of this stuff?
so far, nothing satisfactory. When I arrived there, I was in Lahaina. There was no cell phone service, no internet. People who didn't have a car to drive an hour away literally didn't know what was going on other than by word of mouth. The citizens had created a relief camp with no government involvement at all. It was wonderful in that it was people helping people, but where the heck, 10 days later, was the government? In fact, when FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, finally showed up to this little relief camp, they told them to buzz off. And so I think there was a general disgust and shock by the people. When Joe Biden was first asked about the fires, he said, no comment?
Yeah.
No comment? And then he went on vacation? And I don't know. I think that
To be fair, let's be fair here, because the fact checkers are going to get us. He didn't even realize Hawaii was part of it.
you know,
I don't know how he's still alive.
Yeah,
No,
I-
just
don't think
purely
he
because
is.
he's so frail. I don't know. I don't think there's much going there anymore for him.
no, but
Definitely gives that perception. And with this, he definitely did that.
I think the no comment thing, he was stunned. He didn't know what was up. He had a cognitive moment. But the fact that he went on 1 or 2 vacations before going to Maui was a staff
Yep.
decision. And Hawaii is an extremely Democrat state. It votes about 2-1 Democrat.
Yep.
This isn't even a partisan thing. It's a total failure of every government official. And you know what? It's a reminder that just because you have a white lab coat or a sheriff's badge, or you're an officer of this or an expert of that or a fact checker, doesn't make you particularly smart or clever. In fact, it may be the opposite. Just like the fact checkers working in RMIT, no one would care what they think. Maybe if you're the water equity officer for Hawaii, you're not better than anyone. In fact, you're probably stupider than everyone, because you don't release the water in a fire. And you're the guy in charge of the alarms. You're probably worse than anyone else because you don't sound them in the
I'm sure you
fire.
have your pronouns in your bio on Twitter. So there's that.
I feel like this is one of those stories, unfortunately, which is going to tend to lean towards kind of conspiratorial things, just because of the nature of the story and how it was, the way the media and the government are not covering certain aspects of the human stories on the ground for whatever reason. The involvement of course, the Democrats and Joe Biden. I feel like we'll never really get the exact answers on what exactly happened in terms of the aftermath and the suffering that people are going to go through in Maui.
You know, I think it could be up to 1,000 people dead, and disproportionately children. And this is in a town of 12,000.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because that's a lot of children. That
oh my God.
Yeah.
And I don't even want to tell you some of the stories that I heard over there. And we told our people to walk gently there, because it's a news story, yes, but people there are stunned. They're in shock. People are still saying, oh, my family member will come back any moment. No, I'm not going to take a DNA test to match the bodies that are recovered there. They don't want to. And it was that way after 9/11. People kept thinking, oh, my husband will come back. I'm sure he's just gone missing. He'll come back anytime. When you hear that, when you see that in person, it drains a lot from you. There were some clickbaity Twitter journalists who went there. I think that we went in a little bit slowly, and at first, anyone with a camera or a microphone was pretty much despised at first. But I think our approach, and we helped crowdfund. We raised $25,000 for this citizen relief camp. I think that they started to trust us a little bit more after we actually started to help them. But I think this was a case where citizen journalism was perfect, because you tell the stories of the people. You're not flying in with the regime media to issue government talking points. And I think that this was an example of where citizen journalism could work. And in fact, going in with a small cell phone camera, you're a lot more likely to get someone to talk to you than if you got a big over-the-shoulder camera with your big CBS microphone or something. I don't know. It's just a terrible place. And Maui, if you've ever been there, it really feels like a little bit of heaven. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. But for that day, the fires of hell broke out, and it was a shock.
It reminded me, watching it unfold purely on the media side reminded me quite a lot of watching the Napier floods and being part of the Napier floods, because you had, the same thing, the warning signs, the warning alarm never came up on people's phones, or it came up hours and hours and hours after, they'd had 6-7 meters high water flooding through their whole area. I think there's a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives and a lot of rumors that would get texted around. And I even had one pastor of a church who's a lovely, lovely person said, "Oh, did you hear that apparently gang members went in and stole a whole lot of tools from Carter's and ran out in the middle of lunchtime? They just ransacked the whole place." So I went to Carter's, or I think it was Carter's on Mitre 10. We went there just as they were shutting, managed to get hold of an assistant manager, and he said, "No, that's not true." But that rumour was all around the whole city already by then, because people were just, I think there's this complete sense of distrust with the government and distrust with the media, that if the media now comes out and says, "Oh no, that's a rumour, that's not true," people automatically don't believe them. And that's what I see in Maui as well. And I've seen reporters on Twitter that are saying, "We're getting blocked as well. Stop saying it's just the mainstream media. I am mainstream. I can't get in there to tell the stories." But there's just this feeling of absolute trust that has been lost by the governments worldwide because of the steps that they've taken. And again, community initiatives. When I was first there, I think it was about 4 days after it first happened, and the community were the ones that were funding and helping everybody. They were the ones that started digging houses out, with digging all the silt out of houses. And Man Up, part of Destiny's Church, dug so many houses. They helped so many families during that time. They were incredible. And the news did a piece on them, and they wouldn't put the Man Up, that it was Man Up and Destiny's Church in it. And they wouldn't put who the actual leaders were, which is Brian and Hannah Timaki, because obviously they've been on the freedom side, so they're now blurred, so they wouldn't put actually who the group was, but they said, "Oh, this group's doing amazing work." And it's just so frustrating. It's like, no matter how much you might get frustrated at this group for what they've done on the freedom side, you can't not give them credit when they're sitting there and they're one of the only organisations digging house after house after house and putting thousands of dollars in to look after these people. And so it's just such a shame. I feel like ideology is destroying really fantastic grass level roots. And I know the police came and shut down community initiatives that were running in Maui as well. And you just think there's this layer of bureaucracy, and they get it wrong. They get it wrong, and they're too slow, and it's empower the citizens to look after their communities, because losing your sense of empowerment as an individual and as a community is part of the reason why we're having the breakdowns that we see today. And the media are not doing anything to help that.
Chantal just laying it all out there, smashing it.
I just
here.
feel for the people.
Yeah. Lucky she's here, because we can't be that eloquent.
Yeah, we've got nothing to give.
No, you just see how the people, isn't it? It's just, you see the people and the hurt that they're going through. And I can't imagine, a flood is horrific, and just everything that was destroyed, that still is destroyed when I go back now and see it. There's still cars upside down, houses that are totaled, that you can't even go and dig them out. It's too much. And I can't imagine what it would be like with burning, and even the smell of the smoke and bodies, and just, I don't know how people mentally can recover from something like that, the trauma of that.
Had they started cleaning up some of that in Maui, Ezra? Because it looked like a bomb had gone off. That's the footage that we saw on television. Is that kind of what it looked like when you went there in person?
It did, but what was interesting is the absolute torched cars and houses, and then immediately next to it, a house that was unscathed. It was very odd. Many of the neighborhoods were blocked off by military, because they didn't want, unless you could prove you lived on that street, you were not allowed in. Either they were protecting against looters or just people poking around. Like I say, there were unreclaimed dead human bodies there. And so I can't really object to that kind. In fact, when I arrived, there was a police checkpoint that stopped me and said, "If you're not a resident, we're not allowing you into Lahaina at all." And I talked my way in I had brought with me a Starlink satellite unit. And I said, "Look, I'm bringing a satellite there for the use of the people." And the cop waved me through. But had I not had that, and by the way, the people who I stayed near, no one had internet since the crisis, but I can understand why they wouldn't want people with no connection to the community to go there after 10. What business would you have? And so I can't really say I'm opposed to that.
Okay.
And I don't think it was really nefarious to keep, meddlers out after 10. So, and I can see how that could become fodder for a conspiracy theory, but I can't really object to it.
No, I think you need that. And I mean, Napier had the same thing, but they had police like 24/7 in Eskdale, and they would go to cars, and people wanted it because the looters would come in, and even just feeling like they've become tourism for everybody. Like they weren't getting help from people, but then people wanted to just come and take photos of all the destruction that had happened to their lives. And so I think that actually police and military being there to give people a sense of safety is a good thing.
And I think coming back to what you were first asking, the climate activists, they're not missing out on this opportunity to use that.
No, I mean
I think that's where you were going with the fact that we're going into fire season, and that's
Yes.
what we see. Like you remember, right before COVID, the whole Australia was burning. You remember the photos they were
Yes.
putting up all over the media? Australia was one big fire. So that's
Yeah, and I'm saying they're going very hard on the fact that we're going into fire season.
And did you see that there that they were pushing that, or is that just the media outside just?
I think that's the national media in every. Every time there's any fire, and in Canada,
There's
particularly,
never been floods or fires before in history. I just want to point that out.
and
So that's a new thing.
and to say global warming caused the fire, in Canada in particular, it's human cause. I mean, yes, there's the odd lightning caused fire, but most of it is an unattended campfire, or it's arson. It's arson. The fires increase for arson, and you know what? There's such a strong narrative whenever there's a fire to use the words global boiling, and my point is, I have no evidence of it whatsoever, but it would not shock me if someone from the global warming movement said, this is such powerful propaganda, we're going to start a few fires. I have no proof of that, but we do know that forest fires...
Crazy.
That's the sense that I'm getting with how it's being ramped up.
I mean, we know forest fires have been used as a terrorist weapon, but in Israel, Hamas will launch little fire balloons to start fires, not for propaganda reasons, but to generally burn down fires. Because we know there are eco-terrorists in other ways. It would not be shocking. I mean, listen, we saw riots and fires for Antifa, and all it takes is one guy. In Canada, more than 50 churches were either vandalized or torched in a political act. And if you would torch a church, of course you would torch a forest. Again, I'm speculating. I've not heard of
But it's funny because they speculate all day, and they're allowed to. The fact is, during the fires when they did find a bunch of arsonists in Australia, it happens all the time.
Yeah.
And
Or just recently, the fires in Greece, and I think in Tenerife, police are investigating arson.
So with all of that, but as soon as you say that, the fact check is the censorious, the paid, whatever we're calling them now at Rebel. We've got to come up with an official title. It's annoying because they weaponize language and that's what they've done for a long time. Antifa, the idea that they call themselves anti-fascists, and we go with that. I refuse to do it. I'll call them Antifa because it doesn't say, but I won't call them anti-fascists.
Because they act in a fascist
I think we
way.
need to apply this same thing. We can't call them fact checks. We can call them fact checks, but they will penalise you, and that they would penalise. If you said, I think it's arsonists that did it, even though you don't have proof, but just like they don't have proof that it's global boiling that caused it.
What I've seen, the argument I've seen is that even though an arsonist did set the fire, the reason the fire is so bad is because of climate change and global boiling. Because
because his best friend is climate, his other friend is change, his other friend is global, and
conditions
boiling,
are so bad, and the conditions are so bad that's been created. That's why the fire erupted like that. If it wasn't for climate change and someone set a fire back in the past, it wouldn't be this bad. So that's kind of the way that they get around this whole thing.
They're able to twist everything to get exactly what they want. It's not that hard. Mental gymnastics has become an Olympic sport taken on by many on the left because they can't go to an actual gym.
Oh.
Well, talking about sports, this might be a bit controversial. I don't know if you want to talk about this. It's controversial in Australia. Oh, the Matildas and the World Cup soccer.
Yeah, what about it?
Well, they came fourth, and they're building a statue.
I saw you get a lot of crap on Twitter
I
about
popped
that.
a lot of crap
You
for that
did,
because I
didn't
actually support the Australian women's soccer team, and I'm really.
I don't know, to be honest, I don't actually know if they identify as a women's team anymore.
Well,
Let's just
like,
look,
look,
they're super
as an
woke.
Australian, whenever one of our teams, I'm sure as a Canadian or
love
as a
it.
Kiwi, when whatever sport it is, when one of
back
your
them.
team is doing good, you back them and you
Yeah.
get excited about
A
it.
statue for 4th place. I mean,
Oh, they
you
went
were
that-
lucky to even get a
Do you
ribbon.
know what?
I don't.
Do you know what? The whole debate in Australia became, we weren't even in the finals, and it was whether we're getting a public holiday
Yeah.
if they win. How typical of Labor is that? Let's
Wow.
get a day off work for other people's hard work. And then the funny thing is we didn't even come third. We didn't even come in the top 3. We came 4th. And, A for effort.
Well, no, it's more like a D.
It's an A for effort. It identifies as a win. It's good.
Such an Aussie thing to say.
No, it's
Kiwis would be like, but you didn't win.
You reckon you don't think you guys will build a statue?
don't think
for a
we'd
fourth?
celebrate
if your
fourth.
team, your women's
All
team.
Blacks,
We
they're
care
real
too much
sports.
about our sport to be like.
But we do as
Fourth
Aussies as
is-
well.
Aussies
We're like
care about
sports
sport.
mad.
Yeah, well,
but
you guys care too much.
now
You're
we're
giving a
now we're
statue out to
supporting
4th place,
Yeah,
though.
like I feel
That's
like we're
too
supporting
far.
mediocrity now. Like
Yeah.
But like in our defence, as Australia in soccer's not really a sport we're into,
Traditionally
and
do.
also women's soccer.
No, but you'd celebrate them doing
I
a
can't
good
believe how
job.
many people were. I got into it. I was watching soccer.
yeah,
I'm going to sit here and say I watched it with my kids. I was excited.
yeah.
And then it got really boring really quickly. But like the whole country got behind it,
course.
but it became weird because it was like, okay, all right, guys, now it's a bit embarrassing. We're going nuts over 4th place.
Hmm.
But I'll let you say that on Twitter because I just saw people going, oh, I knew you were Sri Lankan first.
No, I just thought like that's not the Aussie way. I thought we strive to win, come first.
Did you guys hear about it? No. This was like the biggest thing in Australia.
Oh, I heard about the statue thing, but it might have just been from your Twitter now that I think about it.
It was like the
don't know.
biggest. It was the biggest thing, and it was the biggest political debate over
In our
this
country,
public
yeah.
holiday.
Yeah.
As to and we weren't even in the finals.
Yeah, that's just bad economic policy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's shocking to give people a day off because a sports team once won an event.
Yeah.
That's
well, are you going to do
nuts. I
that
just
for
can't
every
even
time
fathom
Australia
that.
wins? Anyways, that became the big argument, and the funny thing is,
Yeah,
they didn't.
I just wanted
they
to
didn't
put
even
that-
come
just wanted to
close.
put that
Yeah.
But like you said, A for effort, except their A was still not
B minus.
anyone else's A. It was a little bit further down the list. But good for them.
F for
but just
effort.
not good enough to get a statue or a public day off for how many million of people are in Australia?
What is that? 30? Yeah,
25, 26, something like
A
this.
few.
that's without my family.
But
Is that? Have we gone through your list? Because it seems like you're scraping the bottom of the
no,
barrel now.
we're coming towards the end of the show.
Rakshan
John
just
gets
wanted to
tired.
end with his Twitter handle.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Is that what you want to talk about?
Anything else, Chantal, we should know about New Zealand? Because we're in your country,
Ooh.
right? We're in your country. You tell us. You got your election coming up on what, the 14th?
Yeah, the
14th
election's-
Same day.
Is it the 14th of October?
The election's going to be spicy.
What date is it?
It's so
Put it on
bad.
the spot.
I know I should know that. I thought it was the
Someone here know?
10th.
Someone in the
For some
live
reason, I thought
audience
it was
know?
the 10th. It is
14th
the
of October. And that's the day of the
So it's me
referendum.
voting 4
Is
days
that the day
early.
of the
That's the
referendum?
referendum in Australia as well.
yeah, the
apparently.
vote
Crazy
for
as that.
yes.
They put
Yeah.
it together.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to give it to the commies. They work together no matter which country. Labor here, Labor there, Labor everywhere.
But it is quite a monumental election because we really are voting effectively for either co-governance of our country or against co-governance of the country.
For people in Australia that are looking at the referendum, it's quite important in this period.
Yeah.
What does that mean in short, co-governance?
In short, essentially, if you're Māori of Māori descent, you're going to get voting rights over and above other New Zealanders. That's it in short. But in practical implementation, like things like Three Waters, they're going to create like separate water entities that are going to be governed by majority, well, not majority, it's split down the middle, and it's going to have Māori 50%, but that's wrong because they only take up about 14-15% of our actual population. So essentially, it's creating race-based policies, and we've seen this in our health system as well. So you get extra points if you're Māori or Pacifica. You also get a point if you're from a low socioeconomic suburb. So it's all these systems that are created it's kind of on equality of outcome rather than of equality of opportunity. And that's the issue, because by that same quota, you now have violent criminals that are being released in the thousands to home detention here in New Zealand. So we're celebrating low prison numbers, but it's because we're releasing violent criminals out into their homes because we want to make sure that we've got low numbers of certain races in our prison population, and it's just completely flawed and completely wrong. And I'm absolutely against any race-based policy. No matter what your race is, we should not have race-based policy. I'm completely against it, and we're not even allowed to have that conversation publicly, it seems. If people publicly speak out against co-governance, they are shut down. The Twitter mob that we were talking about earlier starts to hunt them down. It's become a really awful scene, but I know that for a lot of the Kiwis that I talk with, and Kiwis that are Māori as well, they don't want co-governance. They want to be treated equally. And I think it's a disgusting tactic that they use on the left here, where they try and say, oh, well, that's because the colonizers have got to you and they've told you that you don't need this and that. And it's such a racist way of thinking, because you're telling people they're not intelligent enough based on their own race to make their own judgments for themselves. And I think that that's a disgusting trail of thought that we're even trying to contemplate here in New Zealand. So I'll always be against race-based policies.
It's almost identical
issue. Almost
in fact, I think Aussies need to take heed that, you know, if you vote yes to the voice and you think that's where the line is going to end, just have a look across the ditch. They've got a treaty. That ain't enough. They need co-governance. That's not going to be enough. Even if they get that, that's not. It's never going to stop. So it only stops when you stop it and you say, let's put an end to racism. How about we treat each other like humans? How about that, Ezra?
I'm deeply moved.
Yeah.
By
A last
your
word for
comments on
Ezra.
it.
Like humans.
What do you think about all this, what's happening in our countries around this racial kind of issues that we're having?
Well, there is some of that in Canada too.
Okay.
You have a black prime minister, don't you?
That's a good
Pull
one.
up the photo of Trudeau in
Trudeau's
blackface, right?
blackface. Oh my
Can't believe
God.
he's still prime minister.
You know what? He actually dressed up in blackface. He was asked by a journalist to narrow it down. He literally could not remember how many times he had like a kit, like in a tickle trunk or something, like a costume trunk. Like it was his go-to gag in 3 decades of his life. When he was a teen, in his 20s and his 30s, he's quite something. The funny thing, we're talking about Indigenous issues in Canada. Justin Trudeau has said that Canada is a genocidal country for its treatment of Indigenous people. Genocide. He won't say that about Communist China and their treatment of the Uyghurs. He won't say that about actual genocidal countries, but he will condemn ours. And just a little anecdote, we had an Indigenous Minister of Justice in the country. And by the way, she was brilliant and extremely ethical. And it was a feather in his cap that he appointed her. But then guess what? She actually stood by the law. There was a case when a company closely affiliated with Justin Trudeau was charged with corruption. And Trudeau tried to interfere with the prosecution to get them to settle it. Jody Wilson-Raybould was the name of this Indigenous Justice Minister who did not want to give them a plea deal, wanted to continue prosecuting. Trudeau literally interfered and said, give him a plea deal, and she would not. He fired her as Justice Minister.
Wow.
And when it happened, no one knew what was going on until it eventually came out. So this star, one of the most successful Indigenous politicians in Canadian history, was too ethical for the Liberal government. He sacked her. And I should tell you that and a dozen other things like it, he is now hated by the Indigenous community. He was giving some opening remarks at an Indigenous sports game, and he was like some conference, I don't know even what it was. It was like a mini Olympics. He was booed and drowned out. And how he has fallen. He used to call him. He dressed up in a lot of costumes.
He's a good dresser. Yeah.
He's got a
Has he been
homemade.
to Sri Lanka?
No, but I've seen him dressed in a turban. He's like, that's the whole Indian
like
thing.
Indian.
I'm pretty sure.
Justin Trudeau is not in many ways a real prime minister. He's more of a mascot. And I mean, he's good at being a mascot. He's good at the touchy-feely stuff, the relationships. He's got a good EQ, as the kids would say. But he's been a terrible prime minister, and I think his time's running out. It's a long answer, long way of saying there are some of these Indigenous issues in Canada too, and Trudeau is doing his best to make them worse. He loves the divide. The left
They all
loves
do.
it.
They-
It's cultural Marxism.
It's exactly what Chantel was saying before. It's like they're all following the same script. Again, it's what it's the same formula in every country, and it's generally right now. It seems to be the left everywhere. You've got here New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. They're all Labor governments. I know the UK, but even the so-called conservatives we're seeing around the world also seem to be reading from the same song sheets. Like they're just Labor in Australia. We call them Labor light. They're the same thing. When they talk about things like climate, they're talking about the argument is not about whether the policies are dumb for zero emissions by. It's not. Oh no, we're going to do zero emissions by 2030. No, we'll do it by 2028.
Yeah.
Because we're conservatives and we can beat you. and that's what you're seeing everywhere, and it's scary. And I think that's why they want to shut down other voices and those that are speaking up against the narrative.
At the end of the day, creating this kind of racial division where different groups have different...
All divides. I think it's racial.
Well, all divides,
They're dividing everything. They divide it as mandates. They divide
but
people.
a racial division in the continent where the Indigenous people have a certain advocacy body or a certain voice gives them a power that they've never had before, really, because you can control so many policies through that body. Because, this whole argument about what issues impact Indigenous people, everything impacts them at the end of the day. So you can.
And the best part of that is when you ask different people that are advocating for the voice specifically in Australia, and you go, there was. I think they were talking about one example was the submarines, nuclear submarines, and like, so would the voice have any say in what our decisions are with? And one person who's advocating for the voice will say, No, it's Indigenous. And the other one would say, that impacts us. That's part of our land.
Yeah.
So, they want, it's not about the issues, it's about the power. And everyone wants all these people and all the people that they elect, they put into these systems. When you go to the Indigenous communities like we did in Alice Springs, everybody was saying that it's all the funding, the billions over years of taxpayer dollars that have gone to try help the problems, the people. The money's never gotten there. It goes to a select few at the top that are part of all these different organizations. They create bureaucracies, and then now you just want to create a federal one, another one. It's just to make this small group that have lined their pockets well over years in the name of their people, and their people. Nothing has ever gotten better because you got to stop creating organizations and actually just start doing the work. Everyone knows what the problems are. Go spend a week in Alice Springs. You'll see the problems. You don't need a voice. You don't need a big group, a think tank. You just literally go there. You'll see. And when the prime ministers and whatever goes there, they need to step outside those buildings of their own little
of course,
people they've put in power there, and they need to actually go and see the communities and see the people struggling in the crime. And
more than any of that, it's the biggest con because we have governments now that represent us, but we're going through all types of crises, regardless of having people elected that apparently represent us and do all these things. Look at the state of our countries in so many different ways. If they think that these advisory bodies will create differences, it's all surface level stuff. It's not going to do the meaningful things that all of us as a community of different races, different diversity, whatever it is, come together and ask our governments to do. They don't do it for us. So we're going to find ourselves in the same situation. But look, I always find that we end up talking about the voice to Parliament in this podcast. I can't wait until this actually,
I can't wait for it to be
it's
over.
all over.
Can't wait.
Whatever happens, even though I'm very much opposed to it, whatever happens, I'll be very glad when we don't
It's not
talk
going to
about
pass. It's a joke. It's October 14. That's one thing I can confidently predict is the voice is not going to pass.
Remember he said that. Benji, remember he said that for a real when it does pass,
Benji, if it passes, you got to scrub this episode from every platform. And we've got AI that can sort that. Change what I said. No, I'm predicting easy. Money's on.
All right, passing. You got that prediction, Chantal. Elections, what's going to happen here?
Oh, election prediction.
Putting you on the spot.
I think we're definitely gonna swing towards a right wing government come the
Ooh,
election.
I like that.
Yeah.
I might be allowed in without a visa.
So I don't know.
Oh, they're
He's
not
a
that
shady character.
Well,
We'll
I
see.
like shady characters.
No, I do think we're going to swing towards the right wing. I think people are just so fed up of seeing between Chippy and Jacinda, the red wave is getting boring.
Perfect. And Ezra, did Avi make you buy a copy of his book?
You know, I'm excited that his book is out. I know he's been working on it for a long time, and I guess I didn't have to buy one since we're the publishers. I got a freebie.
He wants to know if you read it.
You know what? I'm working my way through it, but tomorrow I'm looking forward to the presentation of it.
Because you're talking tomorrow at the event.
I know I got to have the book.
You got to finish the
I
book.
got to have the book finished.
We better wrap up tonight then. We better wrap up.
We're gonna wrap up.
I gotta stay
It's
up
about
late
20-minute read. I don't know what your problem is.
No, it's actually great, but and I didn't know, I didn't know so much of your story.
There you go.
And you know what? It's also, it's not a biography, but it's also a manifesto.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think anyone who likes you is going to love the book. And I think people who don't like you, I think they should read it too, because I think first of all, I think they'll warm up to you. But it's a great story. It's a great Australian story, and I think the title just smashes it. Rebel from the Start.
Yeah, you know, when at the moment when that came to me, I was like, "That's so perfect. That's a perfect name on so many levels." But no, I'm really happy with the outcome of it, and it's interesting because I've had feedback from people who say that who tell me that they didn't particularly like me before, for whatever reason. They had all different reasons that they were given by the media over many years, and they've gone, "I get it. And cool, good on you. I don't actually agree with half the shit you say." That's what they say to me. But good on you. And I think that with your history, it makes much more sense. Your story makes sense of who you are today. An absolute legend. On that note, we want to thank you guys for being here with us. Thank you for being such a fighter here in New Zealand or
New Zealand.
I can't get on. I'm just going to keep calling it North Korea until it's liberated. Ezra, thank you so much for coming all the way down to New Zealand and Australia, and for the look, Sean. Why do you keep following me everywhere?
These guys are too
no
cute.
idea.
We're really excited. Like, ladies and gentlemen, tomorrow night, Auckland, so 7 p.m.
Rebelfromthestart.com.
Rebelfromthestart.com.
Tickets still available?
There's still tickets, and we've actually opened it up that you can register to come. Some people hate PayPal.
Yeah.
I think we started that rumor, and now nobody wants to book using PayPal. So if you hate PayPal, you can still register online for all those events and pay at the door in cash.
Ah, perfect.
Yeah. That way we don't have to pay tax for that. That was a joke. That was a joke. So come down there. We've got a few people speaking. I'm going to sign anyone's book if you want my signature, but most people want Rukshan's. So Rukshan will sign books.
I'll sign books on behalf of RVM, yes.
With a personalised hate message.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. And come get a photo. Come say hi. Come chill. You'll see. We're all up for a good chat. You're speaking tomorrow as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Yep.
Come down to meet Chantel, Ezra, and Rukshan, because I guarantee you they're way more interesting than me.
Yeah,
On
that's
that
true.
note, thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
and
guys.
thank you for watching from around the world, Australia and New Zealand. And apologies for all of Benji's technical issues. We'll see you all next week.
Oh, so savage.
End the live stream, Benji. End the live